The place was Okinawa, April, May, June of 1945. They called it the Typhoon of Steel, and Lord, it was. It was the last big battle, the last stepping stone to Japan, and the Japanese knew it. We knew it. It wasn't like the other islands. This was different. This was for all the marbles. I was with the 6th Marine Division, and we were pushing south, trying to break their main line of defense, the Shuri line. It was hell on earth. We were fighting for these little coral ridges, these hills that didn't look like much, but they were fortresses. One of them was called Sugar Loaf Hill. I'll never forget that name. It sounds so sweet, doesn't it? Sugar Loaf. It was the bitterest place I've ever known. The Japanese weren't out in the open. They were dug in like ticks. They had caves, tunnels, pillboxes, all connected underground. We'd be on top of a hill and they'd be right underneath us. In tunnels they'd spent years digging. They could pop out behind us, in the middle of us. You never felt safe. At night they'd come out, throw grenades into our foxholes, try to overrun us. The fighting was so close you could smell them. And the rain. It started raining in May, a miserable cold rain that never stopped. It turned the whole world into mud. Red mud mixed with everything else. You couldn't move the tanks, you could barely get the wounded out. It just added to the misery. We'd fight for days to take one little piece of ground, maybe 100 yards, and lose half a company doing it. I remember we lost thousands of men just for those hills around Sugar Loaf. It was a meat grinder. It just chewed men up and spit them out. And in the middle of all that chaos, all that death, you had to make decisions. The kind of decisions that no 19-year-old kid should ever have to make. Yes, there was. We were advancing, trying to push towards the capital city, Naha. The fighting was fierce, a constant storm of mortar fire and machine guns. We were moving forward, then getting pinned down, moving forward again. It was slow, bloody work. During a small break in the fighting, a lone Japanese soldier just appeared. He sort of stumbled out of the brush. He was lost, trying to find his company, I guess. He saw us, and his hand shot straight up in the air. He was giving up. My gunnery sergeant, a tough-as-nails man, saw him, and then he saw me. He pointed and yelled over the noise, "Walt, take the prisoner back, but you'll be back here in a minute." I just looked at him. I said, "Yes, sir." But in my head I was thinking, a minute? How in God's name am I supposed to take this man back to the command post and be back here in a minute? It was a long way back, and you had to go alone. But I knew what he meant. I knew exactly what that order was. He wasn't saying it out loud, but the message was clear as day. This unit is moving forward. We are not stopping. We cannot spare a man to guard a prisoner, and we are not going to be slowed down. If you get left behind, you're on your own. And being on your own out there, with Japanese soldiers hiding in every hole and every cave, you were a dead man. The gunny was telling me to handle the problem and get my tail back on the line now. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order for my own survival. I grabbed the prisoner by the arm and started walking him back, away from the front line. The sounds of the battle started to fade a little, but you could still hear it rumbling behind you, a constant reminder that my buddies were still in it, still moving, still dying, and I was back here with him. I started to search him. You had to. They were known to hide grenades, to pretend to surrender just to get close enough to blow you and themselves up. But this fellow, he had nothing. No weapons, no documents, just one single thing in his pocket, a photograph. I went to take it and he resisted. He clutched it to his chest and started shaking his head. No, no. I said, yes, yes, I want the picture. He wouldn't give it up. It was the only thing he had in the world, I suppose. We stood there for a moment in this strange tug of war, and I looked at my watch. Time was slipping away. Every second I spent with him, my unit was getting farther and farther away. I could feel the panic starting to rise in my throat. The gunny's words, "Be back here in a minute," were screaming in my head. It wasn't about the prisoner anymore. It was about me. It was about getting stuck out there, alone, between the lines. I knew what I had to do. There was no other choice. It was him or me. So I shot him. I took the picture from his hand and I left him there. I didn't feel a thing. Not then. You couldn't. It was war. It was kill or be killed. I just turned around and ran as fast as I could to rejoin my unit before they left me behind for good. When I finally had a moment to breathe, a moment to stop shaking, I pulled it out and looked at it. And what I saw, it chilled me to the bone. It explained everything. The photo was taken in China. You could tell because in the background was the Great Wall of China. It was unmistakable. In the foreground there were two Japanese soldiers. They looked like officers, proud with their swords. They were standing over a cage, like a big bird cage, and they were holding a severed human head, a Chinese man's head. They were smiling. They were posing with it like a trophy before putting it in the cage. I didn't understand it at first, but later on I was told what it was about. They had this thing about their swords. They believed that if you could slice a man's head off with one single clean stroke, it meant you were a superior warrior, that your spirit was pure. So they would practice. They would take Chinese prisoners or just civilians and practice their swordsmanship on them. That photograph. It wasn't a picture of a wife or a child. It was a souvenir of murder. And in that moment, holding that little piece of paper, the whole war became clear to me. We weren't just fighting soldiers. We were fighting a deep, profound evil, an enemy that saw other people as things to be used for target practice. And it confirmed everything the gunny believed, everything we had to believe to survive. You couldn't trust them. You couldn't hesitate. After seeing that picture, I never again questioned an order. I never again hesitated to do what I had to do to stay alive. It was kill or be killed by an enemy that had no humanity. Before the war feels like a different lifetime, a different person really. I was just a kid from North Carolina working. Life was simple. You worked, you came home, you ate supper with your family, maybe went to a picture show on a Saturday if you had the nickel. The world was small. My world was the county I lived in, maybe the next one over. The biggest thing we worried about was if the crops would come in good, or if you'd have enough money for gas. Europe, Asia, that was just stuff you saw in the newsreels at the theater. It was their war, not ours. We had our own troubles, coming out of the Depression and all. Then came December 7th, 1941. I'll never forget it. It was a Sunday. I was at a friend's house listening to the radio. Music was playing and then it just stopped. A voice came on, talking fast, frantic. Said the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. We didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was, not really. We had to go find a map. But we knew it was ours. It was America. And the feeling, it wasn't fear, it was anger. A cold, hard anger that settled deep in your gut. It was like someone had walked into your house and punched your father. You just knew right then and there that everything had changed. The small world I lived in was gone forever. The next day you saw the lines at the recruiting offices. They stretched around the block. I was young, but I knew I was going. There was no question about it. My daddy, he fought in the first one in France. He never talked about it much, but you could see it in his eyes sometimes. He looked at me and he just nodded. He knew. I could have joined the Army, the Navy, but I chose the Marines. I wanted to be with the toughest. We'd all seen the posters, the dress blues. They had a reputation. They were the first to fight. If I was going to go over there and face the Japanese, I wanted to be the meanest son of a gun in the valley, and that was the Marine Corps. I wanted the best training. I wanted to be with men who wouldn't run when things got bad. I didn't know what I was getting into, not really, but I knew the Marines would make me ready, or kill me trying. Either way, I was going. Paris Island. You say that name to any Marine who went through there, and you'll see him shiver, even if it's 100 degrees outside. It was a shock to the system like nothing you can imagine. You get off that bus in the middle of the night, and the screaming starts. It doesn't stop for 12 weeks. They tear you down to nothing. Everything you thought you were, everything you were proud of, they take it away. You're not Walt anymore. You're maggot. You're idiot. You're whatever scum of the earth name that drill instructor can think of. And they were masters at it. They break you down to a raw nerve. You learn to eat in 2 minutes, sleep in 5, and march until your feet are just bloody stumps in your boots. You learn that the rifle is your wife, your mother, your only friend. You learn to clean it, sleep with it, know every single piece of it by touch in the pitch black. The physical part was brutal. The sand fleas, the humidity that was so thick you could drink it, the endless running and push-ups. But the mental part, that's what really changed you. They were forging you into a weapon. They taught us what we were up against. They didn't sugarcoat it. They told us the Japanese soldier believed his emperor was a god. They told us he would rather die than surrender, that he considered it the ultimate shame. They drilled it into our heads. Kill or be killed. There was no in between. We heard stories from the boys coming back from Guadalcanal and Tarawa, stories of Japanese soldiers playing dead with a grenade in their hand, stories of them using their own wounded as bait for our corpsmen. We learned that compassion on the battlefield would get you and your buddies killed. It was a hard thing for a boy from the country to learn. We were raised to be decent, but they beat that out of you. They replaced it with something else, something harder. By the time you left that island, you weren't a boy anymore. You walked different, you talked different. You were a Marine. You were part of a brotherhood. And the only thing that mattered in the whole world was the Marine to your left and the Marine to your right. We were all green, scared deep down, but on the outside we were the toughest thing on 2 feet, and we truly believed we could beat anyone or anything they put in front of us. The journey over was long, endless. We were packed into a troop ship like sardines in a can. Bunks stacked 5 or 6 high. The air was hot and smelled of sweat and diesel fuel. For weeks, all you saw was water, just a vast blue emptiness in every direction. At night, the ships ran dark. No lights, nothing. You'd go up on deck and you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, but you could feel the presence of the other ships in the convoy. These huge, dark shapes moving silently through the black water. It was eerie. It gave you a lot of time to think. The mood among the men was a mix. There was a lot of bravado, you know. We were Marines, we were young, we thought we were immortal. We'd joke, play cards, talk about girls and what we were going to do when we got home. But underneath it all, there was a current of something else. Anxiety, fear. You'd see it in a man's eyes when he was staring out at the ocean, not really seeing it. We all knew where we were going. We were headed into the teeth of it. As we got closer, you could feel the war. We started seeing more ships, more planes. We'd stop at these little islands that had already been taken, like Guam or Saipan. You'd see the wreckage, sunken ships in the harbor, blasted palm trees that were just splintered stumps, remnants of Japanese bunkers. It made it real. This wasn't a newsreel anymore. Men had fought and died right where we were standing. We started hearing the casualty numbers. We knew that the Japanese defense was getting more and more fanatical the closer we got to their home islands. They were dug in deep. We were told we'd be facing an enemy that had years to prepare their defenses. Caves, tunnels, machine gun nests, placed perfectly to kill us as we came ashore. I remember sailing towards Okinawa. It was the biggest fleet I had ever seen. The U.S. Navy assembled over 1,300 ships for that invasion. The sea was just covered with them as far as you could see. Carriers, battleships, destroyers, all of it. It was supposed to make you feel safe, powerful. And it did for a minute. But it also told you something else. It told you how big this was going to be. You don't bring that much firepower for an easy fight. You bring it for a bloodbath. You bring it when you expect to lose thousands of men. And we did. We lost thousands. Standing on that rail, watching that island get closer on the horizon, I thought about Paris Island. I thought about them screaming, "Kill or be killed." And I just knew that I was about to find out what that really meant. The boy from North Carolina was gone. I was just a Marine waiting to hit the beach. Every second of every day, there was no trust, none. You have to understand, we weren't fighting an army like you see in the movies, where one side wears one uniform and the other wears another, and when they're beaten, they put their hands up. This was something else entirely. We were told from the beginning, and we learned it the hard way, that the Japanese soldier would not surrender. It was the ultimate shame for him, for his family, for his emperor. So his goal wasn't just to fight, it was to die, and to take as many of us with him as he possibly could. That was his mission. That changes everything. It means the fight is never over until every last one of them is dead. And I mean every single one. Oh Lord, everything. You'd be advancing across a field and it'd be littered with bodies, both ours and theirs. You couldn't just walk past them. You couldn't assume a Japanese soldier lying on the ground was dead. We lost good men that way in the beginning. A fellow would walk past a pile of bodies, and one of them would roll over with a grenade in his hand, the pin already pulled. He'd hold the spoon down until you were right on top of him, then let go. Boom. He's dead, but he took 1 or 2 Marines with him. So we learned you had to be thorough. We'd use our rifles, the ones with bayonets. You'd poke them, turn them over. If they moved, if they flinched, you shot them. No questions asked. It sounds brutal now, sitting here in this comfortable room. But over there it was just Tuesday. It was you or him. There was no other choice. They'd hide in spider holes, just a little lid on the ground you'd never see, and pop up right in the middle of your platoon. They'd pull our dead on top of themselves for camouflage. They were masters of it. You couldn't trust anything you saw. On the one hand, yes. When we were on the ships coming in, you couldn't see the end of the fleet. There were ships from horizon to horizon. Over 1,000 of them, they said. Battleships, carriers, destroyers, and all the troop transports. The sky was black with our planes. When the big guns on the battleships started shelling the island, the whole world shook. It felt like nothing could possibly survive that. We were the 10th Army, a force of nearly 200,000 men, Army and Marines together. We thought we were invincible. But then you hit the beach, and your world shrinks down to just you, the guy next to you, and the 50 yards of mud and coral in front of you. All those big ships and planes don't mean a thing when you're face down in a ditch with a machine gun trying to cut you in half. The Japanese had spent years turning that island into a fortress. We landed in April, and the real fighting didn't even start right away. They let us come inland. They were waiting for us. They had pulled back to the southern part of the island, to a thing they called the Shuri line. It wasn't a line like you'd draw on a map. It was hell on earth. It was a whole network of hills and ridges made of coral and limestone, harder than concrete, and they had hollowed it all out. It was a maze of caves, tunnels, bunkers, gun positions, all connected underground. We could bomb a hill for a solid day, turn the top of it into dust, and they'd just be deep inside, waiting. Then, when we'd start to climb it, they'd pop out of a dozen hidden holes on the reverse slope, the side we couldn't see, and just massacre us with mortars and machine guns. We'd fight for 3 days to take one stinking hill, lose half a company, and then at night they'd come swarming back up through their tunnels, and we'd have to do it all over again the next day. It was a meat grinder. It was designed to do one thing: bleed America dry. And it was working. We were losing thousands of men for a few hundred yards of ground. The weather, they called it the plum rain. It started in late May and it didn't stop. It wasn't just rain, it was a monsoon, a deluge. The whole island turned into a sea of mud. Not just regular mud, but this thick, sticky, clay-like muck mixed with coral and everything else. It was up to your knees, sometimes your waist. You couldn't dig a foxhole because it would fill with water as fast as you dug it. Wounded men who couldn't move would drown in it. Tanks, our biggest advantage, would get bogged down and become sitting ducks. The mud pulled at your boots with every step until you were so exhausted you could barely lift your rifle. And the smell was something I'll never forget. It was the smell of mud and cordite and rotting vegetation and death. Thousands of bodies, ours and theirs, were buried in that mud. The rain made everything 1,000 times more miserable. You were never dry. Your skin rotted. Your feet swelled up. But you had to keep going. You had to keep climbing those muddy, bloody hills. You don't have time to think about it. That's the honest truth. The moment you start thinking about home, or about getting killed, or about how insane it all is, that's when you're vulnerable. That's when you make a mistake. You turn a part of yourself off, the part that feels fear or pity or hope. It all goes away. Your world becomes very, very small. It's about taking the next step without getting shot. It's about making sure the guy next to you is okay. It's about cleaning your rifle for the 10th time that day, because if it jams, you're dead. You operate on instinct. Kill or be killed. It's not a slogan, it was our entire existence. I saw guys break. I saw guys just stand up in the middle of a firefight and get cut down because they couldn't take another second of it. I saw guys who would just start crying and couldn't stop. But most of us, we just got harder, colder. You had to. It was the only way to survive the typhoon of steel. That's what they called the battle, and it was the perfect name for it. It was a storm of metal and fire and mud that just chewed you up and spit you out. Yes, there was a place, a little pimple of a hill that didn't look like much on a map. It was a place that cost the Marine Corps some of its finest men, a place none of us who were there will ever forget. It was called Sugar Loaf. When we landed, it was quiet, too quiet. We all knew something was wrong. On the other islands, they hit you on the beaches, but on Okinawa, they let us walk right in. We moved inland for a few days, and then we hit it. It wasn't a line you could see, not like in the movies with trenches and barbed wire. It was just hills, a whole series of coral and limestone ridges that rose up out of the ground. But those hills were alive. The Japanese had spent years digging into them, turning the whole southern part of the island into one giant interlocking fortress. Every ridge, every little lump of ground supported the one next to it. You'd attack one machine gun nest and get cut to ribbons by another one 1,000 yards away that you never even saw. We didn't call it the Shuri line. We just called it hell. And right in the middle of it was this one place, this little 50-foot-high piece of garbage ground they called Sugar Loaf Hill. Looking at it, you'd think nothing of it. It was just a mound. But it was the anchor for their whole defense of the capital city, Naha. And taking that little hill cost us more than some whole islands did. It was the worst place I've ever been in my life, and I pray to God it's the worst place that will ever be. It was a meat grinder. That's the only word for it. The Japanese weren't on the hill, you understand. They were in the hill. It was honeycombed with caves, tunnels, spider holes, hundreds of them. They had mortar pits on the reverse slope, so you couldn't see them from the front. They had machine guns set up in these little coral caves with interlocking fields of fire, so perfectly placed that you couldn't move without 3 of them opening up on you. Every single day was the same nightmare. We'd start in the morning, trying to crawl our way up the slope. You couldn't run. You'd be dead in 2 steps. You crawled, on your belly, pushing your rifle ahead of you, digging your fingers into the dirt. All day you'd be under constant machine gun and mortar fire. You'd see the guy next to you just disappear in a red mist from a mortar shell. You'd gain 10 feet, lose 5 men. By the end of the day, if we were lucky, a handful of us would make it to the top. We'd think we'd taken it, but we never really had it, because as soon as the sun went down, that's when the real horror started. They'd come boiling out of holes in the ground we never even knew were there. They'd hit us with these counterattacks, screaming "Banzai." They knew we were exhausted, low on ammo, and they'd just throw themselves at us all night long. We'd fight them off with bayonets, with our fists, with our K-bar knives. By morning, we'd be pushed back off the crest, and we'd have to start the whole damn thing all over again. For 7 days, we did that. 7 days of taking that hill and losing it. I saw whole platoons get wiped out. We were part of the 6th Marine Division, and I heard after the war we lost over 2,600 men on that one stupid hill in 1 week. You stopped learning the names of the replacements. What was the point? You'd get a new kid in your foxhole at dawn, and by noon you were taking his ammo and water because he was gone. It wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. God, the rain. As if the Japanese weren't enough, the heavens just opened up on us. It wasn't just rain. It was a monsoon, a solid wall of water that never stopped, day or night. It turned that whole battlefield into a sea of mud. But it wasn't just mud. It was this thick, sticky red clay soup mixed with everything else. It was mixed with blood, with body parts, with shell casings, with ration tins, everything. It was a foot deep, 2 feet deep in some places. You couldn't walk. You could only slog through it. It sucked the boots right off your feet. Your rifle would get clogged with it. You couldn't dig a foxhole because it would fill up with water faster than you could bail it out. So you just had to lie in this cold, filthy water, shivering, while the shells came in. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was what it did to the wounded. The corpsmen couldn't get to them. The stretcher bearers would slip and fall, dropping them. The jeeps couldn't move, so you'd just have to leave them there. You'd hear your friends calling for their mothers, calling for a medic, and they'd be lying out there in that slop, sometimes for a whole day. I saw men, wounded men, who were too weak to lift their own heads, drown in the mud. Drown. Right there on the battlefield. The smell. I can't even describe it. The smell of wet rot and cordite from the shells and death. It was the smell of the whole world rotting around you. That rain didn't just soak our bodies. It soaked into our souls. They were. When grenades and satchel charges weren't enough, when you just couldn't get close enough to a cave opening without getting cut in half, you'd call in a Sherman tank. It was a beautiful and a terrible thing to see. It would come grinding and slipping its way up that muddy slope, a huge target for every Japanese anti-tank gun and suicide soldier with a magnetic mine. But if it made it, it was the only thing that could finish the job. They'd get the tank as close as they could to the mouth of a cave, and the first thing they'd do is hit it with the flamethrower. It shot this stuff, this jellied gasoline called napalm. It would just spray all over the entrance and inside, and it stuck to the rock, it stuck to people. It just burned and burned. The screams that came out of those caves, you can't imagine it. It's a sound that gets inside your head and never ever leaves. Men on fire. After the flamethrower, the tank would just open up with its .50 caliber machine gun. It would just pour thousands of rounds right into the opening, ricocheting off the walls, just chewing up everything and everyone inside. They do that to every cave, every pillbox, one by one. It was a brutal, ugly, monstrous way to fight a war, but it was the only way. If you left even one of those positions behind you, they'd wait until you passed and then shoot your whole platoon in the back. You had to be sure. You had to kill every last one of them. That's what it took to move forward. We burned them out of the ground. That's what Sugar Loaf was. We didn't just kill them, we had to erase them from the earth. And it changed us. It made us hard in a way that nothing else ever could. It had to, or you'd never have survived the next 5 minutes. You don't. That's the simple answer. You just don't. The switch never really turns off. The volume gets turned down. I remember coming home on the ship, and for weeks, every time a hatch slammed shut, half the men on that boat would jump a foot in the air, ready to fight. You get back to the States, and people are complaining about the price of eggs, or that the bus is 5 minutes late, and you just stand there and look at them. You want to grab them by the collar and scream, "Do you have any idea what a real problem is?" But you can't. It's not their fault. They weren't there. They don't know that a real problem is watching your buddy get cut in half by machine gun fire, or lying in a muddy hole for 3 days straight with rain and shells coming down, not knowing if you'll ever see the sun again. You come home, but a part of you, the part that lived in that hole, it never leaves the island. For years I couldn't sleep in a quiet room. The silence was louder than the shelling. I'd wake up in a cold sweat thinking I was back on Sugar Loaf, thinking I could hear them whispering in the tunnels beneath me. You learn to live with it. You learn to put on a face for your family, for your job. But that young man who was told to take a prisoner back and be back in a minute, he's always there, right under the surface, reminding you what it takes to survive. It had to not bother me. You understand? There was no other choice. If I had stopped for 1 second on that path, taking that prisoner back, and thought about him as a person, if I'd thought about that picture of his family he might have had, even though he didn't, if I'd thought about him as a son or a husband, I would have hesitated. And if I hesitated, one of two things would have happened. He might have had a grenade I missed, and he'd have killed me. Or I would have taken too long. My unit would have moved on, and I'd have been alone out there in no man's land. and I'd have been a dead man before nightfall. The gunny's order, "Be back here in a minute," that was a life or death command. So you build more than a wall. You build a fortress inside your mind. You turn off every part of you that feels pity or fear or sorrow. You become a machine made of instinct. Your only job is to follow orders and stay alive. The battlefield is the most honest place on earth. There are no lies there. There is only life and death, and they are inches apart at all times. The smell, God, the smell of death was everywhere. It was in your clothes, in your food. You saw things that would make a normal person lose their mind. You saw your friends, boys you shared a cigarette with an hour before, blown to pieces. If you let that in, if you let it bother you, you'd break. You'd curl up in your foxhole and cry, and then you'd be killed. So no, it did not bother me. It couldn't. The bothering part is a luxury for people who are safe. On that island, nobody was safe, and there were no luxuries. I kept it. For a long, long time, I kept it tucked away. It wasn't a souvenir. It wasn't a trophy. It was proof. It was the reason. When you're home and years go by, the memories can start to feel like a bad dream. You start to wonder if it was really as bad as you remember. You wonder if you did the right thing. And then I would look at that picture, and I knew exactly what we were fighting. This wasn't a war between armies fighting over territory. This was a war against an evil that was sweeping across the world. What they did in China, the rape of Nanking, where they killed 300,000 civilians, the beheading contests, the medical experiments. We heard the stories. That picture was just one little snapshot of a monstrous reality. It reminded me why we couldn't give them an inch, why you couldn't trust a single one of them who claimed to surrender. Because an army that does that to civilians, that celebrates cutting a man's head off with a sword, is not an army you can reason with. It's a sickness you have to cut out. So that picture for me was a constant, ugly reminder of the truth. It was the answer to the question, why? It was the justification for every hard thing we had to do. It was proof that we were on the right side of history, no matter how dirty our hands had to get. That boy is gone. He died somewhere in the mud on Okinawa. I came home in his body, but I wasn't him anymore. Before I left, I worried about everything. I worried about what girls thought of me, if I'd get a good job, if I was tough enough. The war burns all that away. It teaches you what's real and what's just noise. You learn that a dry pair of socks is a luxury. A full night's sleep is a miracle. A hot meal is a gift from God. Waking up in the morning, just waking up, that's a victory. You come back and you see people getting angry over the smallest things, and you just can't connect with it. You've seen true horror. So the little dramas of everyday life just don't register. It made me not worry. I'm the same way now. Don't do any good to worry. If you can fix it, fix it. If you can't, worrying about it won't change a thing. The war taught me that the only thing you truly have is this exact moment. The past is gone and the future isn't promised. I think It made me appreciate life more, but it also made me unafraid of death. I've looked it in the eye so many times, it feels more like an old acquaintance than a stranger. That's the biggest change. I left a boy who was afraid of everything, and I came back a man who was afraid of nothing. I want them to know that this, all of this, the country you live in, the freedoms you have, the fact that you can say what you want and live how you want, it wasn't free. It was purchased. It was paid for with the lives of boys who were 18, 19, 20 years old. They bought your freedom with their blood and their futures. We went to the other side of the world and fought an enemy that was absolutely brutal, an enemy that believed they were a master race and that we were inferior. They were cruel beyond imagination. We did what we had to do to stop them. It was a terrible, bloody business, and I want people to remember that. Don't let anyone tell you it was anything less than a fight between good and evil, because I saw that evil up close. I held a picture of it in my hand. We're old men now. There aren't many of us left who were there, who saw it with our own eyes. Soon, we'll all be gone. And when we are, all that's left are the stories. So I'm asking you, listen to them. Find the last of us. Hear what we have to say, because history forgets if no one is left to remember. And this is a part of history you must never, ever forget, because if you do, you risk letting that kind of evil back into the world. And believe me, son, you don't ever want to see that happen again.